Good morning, good afternoon and good evening wherever you are, and welcome to the latest episode of the My Coach Ben podcast. So in this episode we're going to be tackling a very, let's say, emotive topic, a very current topic, and that is diversity and inclusion. What can we make of it? And is it really diversity and inclusion or just a corporate illusion? Let's have a chat. Before we get into it, two things. Firstly, I want to thank the people that have watched the videos, subscribed, liked, and of course commented. I have to hold my hands up. I did make a bit of a, let's say, fundamental mistake in the first video, in that without going into too much detail with YouTube, the comments were turned off. So people that wanted to make a comment couldn't. So apologies for that. But I think you've noticed in the last video and in this one, you're going to have the ability to do that. Remember to like, subscribe, comment as well if you feel the need to, and of course tell your friends, tell your colleagues and tell your family. We're on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. It's all the same, My Coach Ben, and follow the community. Let's build it together. The Oxford English Dictionary defines diversity as, let me read it here, the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of course genders and sexual orientations, etc. Inclusion is defined as the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised, such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. So as we all know, over the last 15 to 20 years, social media, the internet has basically become a way of life. And with that, what it's meant is that a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have a voice, myself being one of them, are now able to present on platforms such as YouTube, of course, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. The list is endless. And with that, it means that a lot of people have a voice, whereas they wouldn't have had, and they're able to voice their concerns. So if you take, for example, over the last few years, we've had the rise of the LGBTQ community, or LGBTQ plus now, yep. So we've had that, of course. We've had greater visibility and inclusion for women. This is great. I think for black and ethnic minorities or people of colour, there's been good strides made as far as their inclusion in jobs which otherwise they would have been excluded from. That said, there's still a long way to go. But I think for most of these groups, I'm sure we'll all admit that advances have been made. I think if you look at women now, we've got the Women's Super League now in football. We've got the same in cricket and in most sports. Yeah, there are women versions of those sports, and of course they're getting a lot of coverage now. So that can only be a good thing. And of course, it's no longer such a big deal to be in any of those. How can we say those persuasions? Yeah, to be lesbian, gay, transsexual, etc. It's actually not that big a deal anymore. So in that sense, diversity and inclusion has actually been a good thing. But what about in the workplace? Many, many moons ago, back in the dim and distant past, in the 1970s and 80s in the UK, there was a programme which was called the Equal Opportunities Programme. And what this essentially meant was, that people that were of a different ethnic or religious background or people with disabilities were to be afforded the same opportunities that able-bodied or non, your kind of indigenous English person or man would be afforded. And this included, of course, women as well. So essentially what would happen is that at the end of every job advert, or maybe even at the beginning, I can't remember, but there was specifically the statement that XYZ organisation is an equal opportunities employer. And this meant that if you were from a minority background, then you are more than welcome to apply. Nowadays, what we find is that many different organisations will have their own interpretation of what diversity and inclusion means. Up until recently, most would agree that a lot of the time this meant that a job would be awarded to someone of a particular gender or particular sexual orientation, perhaps even colour or ethnic background, simply so that a box could be ticked, let's put it that way. Diversity and inclusion is pretty much the same as the equal opportunities movement. Maybe it's been, what can you say? It's a newer and faster version, a bit more current. Diversity and inclusion strategies, which include having X% of women in whatever management position. But the problem with it is, are they even attracted to these positions? Are the organisations actually worth working for? Yeah, so these are things which aren't covered in this kind of quota approach. And of course, you could even argue that this is something which is going to affect productivity in the long run. Let's face it, whatever your sexual orientation or ethnic background or religious belief, it doesn't really have any bearing on whether or not you can do a job or how productive or non-productive you're going to be. On the other hand, there are many organisations that have made great strides in making sure that their workforce, their employees are, yes, diverse, and that there is inclusion. Yeah, this is definitely without doubt. I know the company I work for, let's get it right, the company that I work for, over the last couple of years they've made great improvements in the way that diversity and inclusion is discussed, the way it's been included in part of the corporate culture, which is something we'll come on to later. So it's not all bad, but of course it could be better. It's important to make the distinction between diversity and inclusion for opportunity and diversion and inclusion for outcome. Because in my personal opinion, the two things are very different. So, in one sense, as we've already discussed, you have the opportunity side. And this is where the way you are is not relevant when it comes to deciding whether or not you get a job. But it's also to make sure that people are aware that the opportunity is open to you, because then, of course, you're empowered, you can make a choice. When it comes to the outcome, looking at that as the approach, then you get a situation where people are, I wouldn't say forced into roles or into organisations, but there's a certain kind of voluntold aspect. Let's look at it that way. Results orientated means that you just get bums on seats and it really doesn't matter if they suit or if they fit. Another aspect, of course, in this discussion is in any organisation, who's going to lead it. Personally, I think it would help if someone who's going to lead this kind of initiative is someone that probably has experience of the challenges that come with being in one of these minority groups. This way, you're bound to get a much more positive response, a much more enthusiastic approach, rather than just sort of saddling it with some unsuspecting and, likely not really very interested member of staff, as can be the case. So from the coaching perspective, there are a number of different questions that come to mind. Now, for instance, how is diversity and inclusion going to be defined in the organisation? Does the organisation have the right culture to embrace diversity and inclusion? Let's put it mildly, it's more of a mindset as well as an activity. And if the culture isn't there, then why not? And what needs to be changed in order to achieve this culture? And of course, what's it going to look like? Are you going to take the diversity of opportunity approach or the diversity of opportunity? Yeah, there are two options. Personally, I think opportunity is better than the other way, but there are others who feel that that's not the case and that diversity of outcome is the way forward. In any case, a decision needs to be made. And then, of course, who's going to lead it? What resources are going to be made? Are they resources that the company can afford or are prepared to afford? And last but definitely not least, what steps can we take now? What action can you take to put in place the change in culture, the change in approach, the attractiveness. As the old saying goes, calm waters, never a good sailor made. And with that, I'll leave it for this week. Remember, like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, tell your colleagues. Let's spread the community. Again, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There's many different avenues. Take one, whichever one floats your boat. All the content is going to be across all of these platforms. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. And as usual, until next time, peace. Your Coach Ben. So among all the topics in the workplace, there's the Oxford English Dictionary defines diversity as the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and economic. So to many, this may well appear as an illusion because frankly, the concept has not been well thought out, it's not been well defined, and of course, I can't see my bloody hands on this thing, can you? Therefore, we can all agree that essentially it's important to make the distinction